Welcome to Season 5 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast, the podcast that gives a voice to the neurodivergent community. My name is Andreia Costa, and I am your host. I am also the mum to a beautiful 9-year-old autistic daughter, and she is my world. At the age of 42, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and through my lived experience, I've developed a deep passion for all things neurodiversity. My daughter gave me purpose. My neurodivergence keeps the passion alive. By sharing my journey, I hope to help others feeling seen, understood, and less alone. Through conversations with guests from a wide range of backgrounds and perspectives, my aim is to challenge assumptions, spark curiosity, and enlighten all kinds of minds. This season brings another incredible lineup of guests, from comedians and writers to alternative provision leads, therapists, parent advocates, and researchers from the University of Oxford. Every guest has an inspiring journey and a powerful story to share. This is a space for honesty, connection, and celebration, where difference is not just accepted, but valued. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Season 5 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. Today I have another special guest, because all my guests are very special, and I'm very excited to learn about her journey so far. So she's a novelist, she's a blogger, and has lived experience of autism. Her blog is Life with a Label, the Diary of an Autistic Girl. And she's the author of The Magical Summer. Yeah, I'm sorry. I need to say this again, because I didn't say the full title. I knew this was going to happen. The Magical Summer of Evie Adelman. Welcome, Harriet de Mesquita.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly, because so many people don't do the Mesquita, they do the Mesquita. So thank you.
You're very welcome. We also just realized before we started recording that we have Portuguese blood. So we have that in common. That's why I can pronounce your name properly. And I'm glad to do that, because it's always the same with me. Some people call me Andrea or Andrea, but it's actually Andreia, although it's difficult to say, so it's understandable. Okay, Harriet, so why don't we start with you telling us a little bit more about yourself and where your love of writing started?
Of course. So as you've just said, I'm a writer, but I actually came quite late to writing. So I wanted to be a ballet dancer when I was younger and did a lot of classical dance training, but started getting a little bit injured by that. So I then studied psychology at university, went into working in mental health. That then kind of went into physical health. I then retrained as a Pilates teacher, and I actually still teach Pilates today as well as write. But my novel was published this year in June. And I am also a bit of a latecomer to my own autism. So I was diagnosed autistic at 36. So obviously always been autistic, but was undiagnosed for most of my life. And that was when I started blogging post-diagnosis. And I think for me, writing has always been well, I think it started with reading, a love of books, really. And I think a lot of writers start that way. They start as really avid, voracious readers, and that was definitely me. And I think for me, books served two purposes, really. I think firstly, they were escapism, which I think they are for a lot of people. But I think as an autistic child growing up, you need that escapism sometimes. You need to just be able to leave the world behind and go into another world a little bit. And they were also really helpful books from a practical point of view, because I often didn't really understand how other people worked, or how they ticked, or why they reacted the way they did. And actually books, especially fiction, I actually sort of learned quite a lot about other people from reading. And then I started writing, as I said, quite late, but I think also for me as an autistic person, I know that a lot of autistic people are completely non-verbal. So I think it's about 25% of autistic people. For
Mhm.
me, I have selective mutism, so I lose the power of speech from time to time, especially when I'm really stressed. And I think for me, writing is a really wonderful way of communicating that isn't dependent on your voice. And I think that was why dancing and ballet appealed to me so much too, because it's just a way of expressing yourself that is not dependent on your voice, so you don't have that worry about your voice kind of giving out. So writing is a kind of extension of that, and just finding a way to express myself that feels really safe, and that makes me really happy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the proof that, speech is not the only form of communication, and you can definitely express yourself in a wide variety
Yeah,
of other forms. So
yeah.
that's a very, very interesting
um,
story. And in terms of the diagnosis, because it's been late,
mm.
how do you feel that it changed the way you see yourself and your past experiences?
I mean, it was a massive change, and a huge sort of turning point in my life, and a really positive change. But I think, having grown up undiagnosed, I don't know if this is just me, but I very much veered between thinking, well, everyone must be like me. I can't be that different to other people, but everyone must just be coping with life a lot better than me. So I sort of veered between thinking that, and then thinking, no, actually, I am, for some reason, whatever reason, I am kind of really different to other people, and that's really, really strange and really weird. And so, sort of swinging between those two extremes, neither of which were particularly healthy, I think I found the world a very confusing place when I was growing up, and I think getting a diagnosis, it gave me a reason as to why I am the way I am. And I think it gave me more of a permission to be myself as well. And I think, again, perhaps this is just me, but I think a lot of late diagnosed autistic people will say that even though you don't have a diagnosis, and I know sort of an autism diagnosis is sort of often quite a stigmatized thing, you kind of collect negative adjectives that have been used to describe you over the years. People will describe you as kind of, maybe at best, sort of quirky, or a bit
Mhm.
weird, but the adjectives can certainly get a lot worse than that. And you can be described as sort of arrogant, perhaps, or cold, or unfeeling, or, and I think those adjectives stay with us. And I think it's quite hard for us not to internalize those adjectives and just feel that we're always doing everything wrong. And I think a diagnosis really helped me realize that, yes, I was different, but it gave me a framework in which to understand that, and a vocabulary in which to express it. So that was really important. And I think, there's being autistic. There's the core of who we are as autistic people. But there's also that level of awareness we have of how we are compared to other people and compared to the outside world. And that level of awareness, I think, is different for each autistic person. But for me, that feeling of difference was very strong. And that was kind of another layer of a struggle, really, on top of just being autistic and coping with my autistic traits, and just getting through the day, kind of thing. So I think diagnosis removed that layer of worry, of thinking, well,
Mhm.
why is that happening? Why has that been lost in translation? Why do I not understand what's going on? And I think that just frees up more mental space us, for us to be ourselves and for us to just, relax and be happy within who we are. So it was a huge turning point for me, and I think there is that level of grief looking back. I think that there's a lot to come to terms with post-diagnosis, and I think I was slightly naive when I was first diagnosed, thinking, well, I know that I'm autistic now, and that's great. Everything will be great. But I think you do a lot of looking back, like you were saying about your past experiences, um, and you wonder whether things could have been different and could have been better if you'd had a diagnosis and known when you were younger. I think this is a very personal thing, and I think a lot of early diagnosed people would probably say no. um, things aren't necessarily better. Um, but I think for me, I would have liked to have known. So just getting a diagnosis, even at 36, was really important for me.
Mhm. Definitely, because if you are younger when you get to know, it might be challenging, but at least there will be support that can be put in place, and you don't grow up. And also, if we think about at least the teenager years, right, where
Mm,
when we are trying to figure out who we are, it's a
yeah,
very confusing period.
yeah,
So if
yeah,
you had known back then, it would have shaped you.
exactly.
It would have
Yeah,
shaped your future.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the nice thing about an adult diagnosis for me was that I pursued it, and I felt in control of it. I think sometimes for people who've had diagnoses as children, they feel out of control and they feel that it's been sort of pushed on them, and perhaps they don't necessarily understand it. So, but I think, yeah, I think just for me being able to understand how I worked would have been huge, and made a big difference when I was growing up, and like you said, when I was a teenager.
Yeah, definitely understandable. So I'm guessing that this has been what inspired you to start your blog, Life with a Label. But what was the moment when you said, okay, I've got a diagnosis now. I kind of know who I am, even though I'm still discovering myself.
Mm.
What was that moment? Can you share it with us?
Um, I'm not sure there was a specific moment necessarily, but I think, um, and again, this is probably a very autistic thing, but I really started doing my research and got very, very focused on all things autistic in leading up to my
Hmm.
diagnosis and afterwards. So I was kind of looking at everything I possibly could to do with autism. And it's strange because if you're late diagnosed, you do grow up and autism is something other, and then suddenly this thing becomes you. And I also remember at the time of my diagnosis, the film Music had come out, by
Hmm.
Sia, that had an autistic main character, and it
Yeah.
was very controversial. And I personally found it a bit of a difficult watch, but anyway. And I sort of realised that there were a lot of things to be said about autism, and that I kind of wanted to say them. And I think I'm not alone in that, the sense that when you're diagnosed as an adult, actually you have opinions about this, and you want to express how you feel about it, and you want to share your journey with other people. And I think for me, completely by accident, but my light bulb moment came about my autism actually because I'd started watching YouTube videos of autistic women, um,
Hmm.
talking very articulately, very sort of level headedly about their experience as autistic people. And that was how I realized I was autistic. So it was pretty soon post diagnosis that I wanted to start a blog, just to get some things off my chest, but also hopefully to share my experiences in a way that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. It's quite interesting that you mention Sia's movie Music, because I've only
Mm.
watched it recently following another interview. One of my guests
Right.
mentioned it to me, and I'm a massive Sia fan, but I had never
Yeah.
heard about the movie. I was like, how is this possible? And I did. It's quite strong, but I did love it because there's so
Mm,
much
mm.
on music that I see in my daughter as well.
Yeah,
The,
yeah.
constant steaming,
Mm,
and I was really happy to see that in media representation, because
Mm.
most of the times you do have representation, but it doesn't have like a full package, or
Yeah,
it doesn't focus much on the learning disability side of
yeah,
things.
yeah. No, you're
So
right. Yeah, yeah. No,
yeah,
you are
I
right. Yeah.
really, yeah, I really enjoyed the movie, and yeah, and I love the eccentricity, or how extravagant he always is. So
Mm.
I love
Well,
it.
well, well, she has been diagnosed autistic, hasn't she, since Sia?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
so that's kind of interesting. I personally found the movie, I found it quite a hard watch physically because of the sort of bright
Mhm.
colours when they go into her mind, and I think she was
Yeah,
trying to portray that very vivid inner world. But as an autistic person, I found it quite hard to watch. So it was an interesting thing. But
yeah,
but yeah.
yeah. That's understandable.
Mm,
Okay, so now moving on. Well, we talked about your writing
mm,
and creative process. So you write about neurodivergent women in your
mm,
books.
mm.
Can you tell us why that's important to you?
Well, I think partly it is just writing what you know. So I think before I was diagnosed, so I started writing in my early to mid 30s, and so sort of
Hmm.
just a little bit before I was diagnosed. And for me, even before I was diagnosed, I was writing these female characters that were kind of loners and very much observers rather than doers. They watched
Hmm.
people very carefully, and these characters had a very vivid internal life, but maybe struggled a little bit in the outside world. And of course, looking back, those characters were autistic, and I think said a lot about me and about how my mind worked. But I think post diagnosis, I actually set aside a manuscript I was working on and immediately began writing Evie, the novel that was published this year.
Hmm.
And so it was partly about writing about what you know, but I think my diagnosis gave me a little bit of impetus and motivation in the sense that I feel my autism was missed when I was younger because I was a girl. I did mask my autism. Again, a lot of girls
Hmm.
do. But I kind of feel that a lot of people didn't really want to see my autism because it just wasn't seen as something that happened in women and girls. And even at university as a psychology student, we studied the extreme masculinity theory of autism. So the idea that autism is just kind of masculinity on steroids, and it was a largely discredited theory by then, but not completely. So I wanted to represent women and girls like me. I think it's so important to grow up and be able to see yourself in books or, on TV or whatever sort of creative outlets we have. So that was really important to me. And I also think, as autistic people, we're often judged so harshly. I think so much of our experience is internal and it's about how our brains are wired. And a lot of that gets lost in translation. People just see our behavior and
Hmm.
they interpret our behavior in their way, in a sort of neurotypical way. And then we're often found wanting or told that we're doing things wrong or told that we're weird. And I think actually literature is a great way of kind of bridging that kind of translation gap. I think, there's a lot of really great autistic memoirs out. Um, People sharing their experiences, and I certainly read quite a few after I was diagnosed. But I think actually, in terms of fiction, it can be a really great tool. I think
Yeah,
people read books for a different perspective to walk a mile in somebody different's shoes. So I think actually writing autistic protagonists and then forcing people to step inside their mind a little bit, I think that can be really helpful. So that's kind of what motivates me to create autistic characters, and especially female autistic characters.
yeah, yeah, and that makes total sense. So your
Mm.
book was launched in June of this
Yes,
year.
that's right. Yep, yep.
It's the magical summer of Evie Adelman. I got it right now.
You did?
Can you tell us a bit, give us a summary of the story? And we understand that Evie is autistic, or she will have. So can you just tell us a little bit more about the book?
Of course. So the novel is about one girl's journey. It's about Evie. She's 21. She's Jewish, and at the start of the novel, she's living quite a frustrating, kind of very conventional existence in her parents' house in an affluent suburb of Leeds. She's part of the Jewish community there, but she's also really quite an outsider. And the one person Evie is really close to is her Aunt Mim, who's a very strong minded and rather eccentric character herself. But other than that, she doesn't really feel that she connects with many people. And Evie is convinced that this is because she's a witch. Her parents are
Okay.
unconvinced by this, and Evie's been assessed and given a diagnosis of Asperger's because the novel is set in 1982, so it was Asperger's then. It would be autism today. And Aunt Mim dies suddenly, and she leaves all her fortune to Evie, and Evie decides to make a break for freedom. And she moves out of the family home. She goes down to a little village in rural West Yorkshire and she tries to be the sort of friendly white witch of the village and tries to discover really who she is. So she thinks she's exploring herself through witchcraft. I would also say she's learning a lot about her own mind and her neurodivergence. And she has quite a lot of obstacles to overcome. She finds herself in a kind of love triangle between her first love, Alex, who moves into the village with his new wife, and this tall, sort of dark, handsome stranger that she meets, who's a little bit of an unknowable quantity. And the ghost of Aunt Mim has taken to reappearing at odd moments to offer Evie words of wisdom and encouragement. Um, but it's about how we go about finding our place in the world, and especially I think if you are a woman, and especially if you're a woman on your own and you're quite an unconventional person for whatever reason, it's about how do we find a life that best suits us.
Sounds very interesting. I definitely need to read it. And again, I'm
Thank
sorry that I
you.
didn't read it
No,
before
no, that's
the
fine. Don't
interview.
worry. Don't worry.
And how much do you see yourself in Evie?
Um, it's definitely a little bit autobiographical. I mean, I'm a Londoner, but a few
Mhm.
years ago I moved out of London and I set myself up in a very rural part of northeast Suffolk. So I have that kind of journey from city girl to country girl, and you know it has definitely had an effect on my neurodivergence. But I think I think the biggest similarity between me and Evie is the way in which we express our autism. So obviously, you know, autism is a really broad spectrum and everybody's very different. Um, Evie was the first kind of openly autistic character that I wrote, and she was the first autistic character that I wrote knowing that I was autistic as well. So I kept our
Mhm.
autism sort of fairly similar. You know, we're both sort of very hypersensitive. We both have synesthesia. We both have echolalia. You know, there's just a lot of similarities that way. Um, but we're definitely not the same people. You know, I think, I mean, for a start, I was 15 years older than Evie when I was writing that novel, and you know, Evie's a lot more impulsive, I think, compared to me, and she makes decisions that I would not have made, you know, for better or worse. So we're definitely not the same people, but she was a great avatar, sort of,
Mhm.
to explore things sort of through in the novel.
Yeah, yeah. And what was the most enjoyable part of writing the novel?
For me, I'm a planner and an organizer, which I mean I'm autistic, so go figure. But for me, I think I love that stage of building up to starting writing. So I love, you know, getting my notebooks and making all my notes and getting organized. And this novel did require quite a lot of research because it was set in 1982, as I've said, so slightly before I was born.
Mhm.
And witchcraft really fascinated it had always fascinated me from a socio kind of political point of view, in the sense of how it was used kind of against women. But I didn't know anything about how one goes about practicing witchcraft, or what particularly motivates you to call yourself a witch necessarily. So I had to learn all about
Yeah.
that. And so, yeah, I just really enjoyed kind of doing deep dives into all of those things. And I really hate writing and then having to break off and look something up, you know. I like to feel like really
Yeah.
prepared before I get going. So for me, actually, the best part of it was just getting all my kind of ducks in a row, and planning and feeling like I kind of knew what I was going to be doing.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. And was there
Mm.
any, did you face any challenges or anything that you recall being the hardest?
I think you know what, that for me, the hardest part is always once I've written a first draft of a manuscript, and then I always kind of put it in a drawer for a couple of weeks just to give myself a break.
Mhm.
And then you get it out and you do a read through, and you work out what needs editing. And that first read through is so soul destroying, so much of the time, because I really push through with the first draft of manuscript. I just get it written so I've got something I can work on. But actually, then when you're reading back, a lot of it needs changing up a little bit. Some things don't work. There are some passages that are just really bad. So it can be quite dispiriting reading through and thinking that it needs a lot of work. I mean, maybe there are some writers that can do like a perfect first draft. I don't know. I certainly cannot. Um, and I think, being autistic, I'm very black and white in how I think about things. So I get very despondent very easily. So after I've read through a first draft, I've literally got my head in my hands thinking, oh, this is terrible. This is the worst thing ever. And then, you get over it and you think, okay, well, this needs to be changed and that needs to be changed, and then it'll be better. But I think that can be hard as an autistic person, sort of finding the middle ground and being sort of, hopeful about things that haven't quite worked out for the first time. So that's the hardest
Yeah,
bit for
yeah,
me.
yeah. It's very easy to be hard on yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And do you have any routines or sensory preferences that help when you write?
I think I'm definitely a morning person. So I'm one
Hmm.
of those people that kind of, as the day goes on, my brain steadily goes bleh. So I try and get most of my writing done in the morning. Um, and I think, um, I think minimizing sensory distractions is quite important to me. Actually, minimizing distractions in general. So again, like a lot of autistic people, I have never been able to multitask. So if I have lots of things to do, even if it's just lots of little things, I get very overwhelmed very quickly. And sometimes I'll just sort of completely shut down and switch off, because I just can't cope with knowing that I have to get lots of things done and my attention being pulled in those directions. So it
Yeah.
probably looks like procrastination, but um, I actually, if I've got to sort of email somebody or check something, blah, 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 I will do all of that stuff before I sit down to write, just so that it's not knocking about in the back of my head. And I think in sensory terms, it's very much, as I said, about minimizing sensory sort of distractions, because I'm the hypersensitive end of autism. So
Hmm.
I know there's this kind of stereotype of or to, sort of the perfect writer sitting by this sort of lovely open window or sort of open French door with a beautiful view. But I'm the opposite. I tend to shut myself away, no music. And my parents go to this house in Norfolk every year in March, for a little holiday, and I normally go with them. And there's this windowless walk-in laundry cupboard. and I'll
Hmm.
just shut myself in there, and they'll be like, "Oh, you going up to your cupboard again, to do some writing?" I'll be like, "Yes, yeah, I'm going to my cupboard." So I like that feeling of safety, being quite enclosed when I
Yeah.
write. So that's the kind of environment that I try to kind of create for myself.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it's whatever works best for you. Some people work better with music or listening to a podcast. I, for example, cannot be doing work and listening to a podcast at the same time because
No.
I just feel like I'm not focusing on one or the other. So,
I think that's
yeah,
such an autistic thing, or you are just focusing on one and just completely ignoring the other, and then you're thinking, well, there's no point in
yeah,
trying to do both. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, definitely. Okay, so moving on to identity. So
Mhm.
your work explores autism, the Jewish identity, and family. So I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of an issue here,
Oh, don't worry.
trying to follow my questions because I can't remember all of them. Um, so how do these parts of who you are connect with you?
Well, I think I being Jewish, I've never actually grown up in a Jewish community. Um,
Hmm.
my parents, even in London, we lived in South London, but there wasn't a synagogue anywhere near. My parents aren't particularly observant, especially my mum, because her father wasn't Jewish. And so for me, being Jewish is something that's always set me apart a little bit. It's always made me an outsider, but also it's always been something really special. And again, with the autism, you grow up with your mind working very differently to other people's, and that affects how you perceive things, but also how other people perceive you. And and as I said at the beginning, I think the world can be a very confusing and quite frightening place. If you are autistic like that, and it can be confusing if you're Jewish but nobody else around you is Jewish too. And I think learning that I was Jewish and learning that I was autistic much later on, those two things have been the only things that have ever really made sense of myself. And I
Hmm.
think obviously I learned that I was Jewish a lot sort of earlier than when I was autistic. But I I think being Jewish and working out how to be Jewish and how to express that identity has been a really good rehearsal for then finding out that I was autistic. So, for me, being Jewish is an amazing thing. It connects me to a history and to a people, and it really gives me roots. And that's before you even factor in the faith side of things. But you learn quite quickly that some people will try and use your identity against you, and they have an issue with you being Jewish, and they will try and make you feel ashamed or embarrassed about it. And I think, I mean, unfortunately, I think anti-Semitism is actually more prevalent now than when I was growing up. It's definitely
Hmm.
sort of been on the rise these last few years. Um, but even when I was growing up, I encountered it. And, nothing would ever make me embarrassed or ashamed of being Jewish. And I think it's who I am, and you have to sit in that with confidence. So then when I found out that I was autistic, in a way, it was a similar thing. I think there are lots of parts of being autistic that are inherently difficult, but there are lots of good things about it too. And I think you then realize that other people choose to stigmatize it, other people choose to use it against you. And again, you have to just sit in it and say, well, no, this is who I am, and I'm not going to apologize for that. So I think it's been a similar sort of process with both of those things, just being part of a minority group that isn't necessarily that well understood all the time.
Yeah, I'm always interested in cultural differences. Being
Mm,
a foreigner living in a
mm,
in a different country, and and acknowledging that even
mm,
though it's still Europe, that I'm white European, there's
mm.
still differences. So I'm quite
Yeah.
curious to know from you how is the acceptance of the Jewish community on neurodivergence and on
Mm.
autism specifically?
Oh, it's a very difficult one because we're not, I mean, again, like with the autistic community, we're not a sort of homogenous kind of people. If you go more towards the Orthodox and Hasidic and Haredi, the sort of end of Judaism, the real sort of ultra Orthodox,
Mhm.
neurodivergence is actually seen as a state where you're actually kind of closer to God. So in a society where sort of holiness is everything, and that connection to God is always your main motivation, actually
Mhm.
neurodivergence is this sort of slightly exalted state. But I think it very much depends. I mean, I think, to be honest, it depends on the individual people. I know sort of all Jewish communities try and welcome everybody, within their community as much as possible. Obviously, attitudes towards neurodivergence, change depending on your perhaps perception of
Mhm.
it, your age, maybe. So I wouldn't say there's a sort of uniform attitude towards it, really. Um, I think it depends more on the people that you meet. But there is that sort of line in the sort of ultra orthodox community that it is really special. So there is that.
Yeah, very interesting. Yes, I think across every culture, it will be different,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
way that neurodivergence is looked at.
mm, yeah,
But
yeah.
thank you for sharing, because I know this was not one of the questions that I had
No, no, that's right.
initially thought about.
Yeah.
Um, so we talked about what the representation of autistic women means in
Mm,
literature to
mm.
you, but how do you hope that readers, both autistic and non-autistic, will feel when they read your stories?
Well, I hope if you are an autistic reader, then you feel seen a little bit and you can relate to Evie as a character. I mean, she's not the
Mhm.
only, I would say, autistic character in the book. I would say you look at her family and you can see those kind of threads. Um, and I hope if you're not an autistic reader, then you would have found it interesting being immersed in Evie's world. She's the protagonist. It's very much her book. It's her voice. It's written first person, and it's her diary. Um, so I hope that it is a real sort of immersive and hopefully interesting and informative kind of experience for non-autistic readers. I mean, I try. I try not to think too much about how people are going to perceive um,
Mhm.
the characters as I'm writing it. I think you can't get too caught up in that. I think obviously, you have to honor the fact that she's autistic and portray her autism in the most authentic way possible. And the same with her being Jewish, I think. But at the same time, I sort of write for myself, and I think if you're writing with your voice and being honest as a writer, I think people will relate to that rather than thinking, well, I better put this in because people might like that or people might not approve of this. So I kind of um, I hope that people will find it enjoyable, but at the same time, I sort of try not to think about it too much. I mean, the only thing that worried me slightly was the fact that Evie was given an Asperger's diagnosis, because obviously I know some people still use the diagnosis of Asperger's, but it is a bit of
Mhm.
a hot topic and a bit of a controversial thing. But I think given that the novel was set when it was, that's
Yeah,
what would
I
have
think it
happened.
makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and I think people have been very sort of understanding about that. So I'm relieved about that.
Yeah, it makes it contextualized to the
Mm,
timing of the action, so that makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, okay. And you've had an interesting career path, as you
Mm,
mentioned. So from science and ballet to mental
mm,
health and writing. So
mm.
how have all of these experiences influenced your stories?
Well, um, I think I've just needed to assimilate a lot of experience before I felt able to sit down as a writer and craft stories with real people and real motivations and people going through real things. I think I probably had quite a sheltered upbringing, and I think as a neurodivergent person, I think sometimes we do develop late. We're sometimes a bit late to the party, and other people sort of hit those sort of developmental markers very sort of evenly and sort of within the time frame that you're expected to. And sometimes when you're autistic, you're precocious in some things, but sort of falling behind a bit in others. And so I
Others,
think
yes.
yes, I think it's quite a sort of common thing, and we just sometimes need more time. So I think working in healthcare was great for me because I just worked with people from all walks of life. A lot of people I worked with were autistic, um, and it just really shows you just a kind of depth and breadth of life. And it's so interesting to see how different people think and how their backgrounds affect them and all that kind of thing. So that was great for me as a writer. And I think ballet in the dance world was really great for my confidence because I think I did lack a lot of confidence growing up. I was very cautious and very introverted. And again, like I said, ballet, it does give you that method of communication. It's really expressive. And
Mhm.
actually, at my ballet school, most people weren't English. And because there was that sort of that there was often a sort of language divide. In a way, we were all on a level playing field. And I think that helped me fit in, and people were less judgmental of each other because we were all so different. So that was a really lovely experience for me. And, my ballet teacher, Brigitte, she became like a mother to me. She was a great role model. And it was a lovely environment where I could push myself, but also feel safe. So I think that developed me a lot as a person, which then helped as a writer. Whereas the sort of working in healthcare just was really helpful, showing me how other people worked as well, which then helped me as a writer as well.
Yeah, yeah. And do you at the moment, are you just writing, or do you do any ballet or dance, or do you do any
I
of these past experiences still?
Well, I do still teach. Teaching Pilates is kind of a little bit of a remnant of the healthcare
Hmm.
thing in a way, because I work with a lot of
Yeah.
people who have sort of conditions and things like that. Um, and ballet, I most mornings when I can, if I'm not too busy or teaching an early morning class, I do try and do a bit of a ballet bar. So I do dance a little bit. My ballet school, unfortunately, in London, shut down. It didn't survive the pandemic, but I tend to use YouTube videos just because, as well as an
Hmm.
autistic person, it's less of a thing if I can just dance in my own home. I
Yeah.
normally get like 20 minutes in, and then then my body starts clicking and cracking, and I think, no, I'm actually 41, and I probably shouldn't be trying to throw my leg up behind my ear. Um, so it's not always the most therapeutic of experiences, but I do still try.
Yeah, no, that's great, and it doesn't matter if it's only 20 minutes.
Yeah,
The love for it is still there, and you're still
yeah,
moving your body anyway.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what helps you manage your energy and rest and keeping your mind creative for your
Um,
writing?
well, I think actually telly does a lot. I'm a really visual
Hmm.
person, and I watch quite a lot of TV, and especially in the evenings, I really use um, watching TV to regulate myself. I'm quite dependent on it. Um, and I think, I need a certain amount of time alone, like all autistic people, really. We need that time to recharge, and especially I think if we are autistic people who can and do mask, which I still do quite a lot when I'm out, you need to have that space where the mask just drops and you can be
Drops.
you. So I have my routines. I actually think, relating back to what we were just talking about, Pilates teaching is great for me because it forces me to be social and it's physical. And writing, obviously, I could easily become a hermit, like far too easily, and and it's very sedentary. So I think having that physical side to my nature helps. And I do also live about 9 or 10 miles from the coast, so going to the
Mhm.
water really helps too. But I think with any autistic person, I think so much of our well-being is also kind of tied up in a feeling of control. I think we do need to sort of
Mhm.
feel in control of our lives to a certain degree. And I think for me, that's very much managing things and knowing what I'm going to be doing, knowing that I can prepare for those things, knowing that I'm not going to be sort of swamped or, have sort of some unexpected things. So I guess that goes back to being a planner, but I think it's about finding that balance for yourself as to what you can cope with, probably.
Yeah.
And feeling that that's your decision to make, and that you're in command of how you live your life. I think that's a huge thing when you're autistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're now based in rural Suffolk, and you
Yeah,
swapped busy London for
yeah.
it. And you just mentioned that you are very close to the seaside as well. So
Mm.
how has this change impacted your well-being?
Well, it's had a huge impact. I mean, I moved out of London because I mean I loved London, and I am a Londoner. It was my home, but um, it was just starting to aggravate my senses constantly, and there was just that low level stress all the time. Well, sometimes not low level, sometimes fairly high level stress.
Yeah,
Um, and I was having to travel around a lot for work, and I was just finding that London, eh, again, I wasn't diagnosed back then, but the way I would describe it now, looking back, is that London was really starting to aggravate my autism. Um, and so moving to the country, it was a massive change, but it gave me the calm and the quiet and the space. And I think that helped my writing. I could really focus on my writing. It is a bit sort of six of one and half a dozen of the other, in the sense that my special interests do include going to ballet and the theatre and exhibitions and
yeah,
things. So the lack of stimulation in the country is wonderful, but I sometimes miss the stimulation of the city. So
yeah,
you can never have it kind of both ways. But for now, I'm happy being a country girl, I think.
yeah. You cannot have it all, sadly.
No, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of community, what kind of response have you received from the autistic and both the autistic and the Jewish communities about your writing work?
Well, I was actually chatting to a friend of mine's mother who's Jewish and in her mid-80s, and she was saying sort of that she loved bits and pieces of the book, and she was like, "You have to be Jewish in order to know that and write that. It's like that insider perspective." And I was really relieved when she said that. And I'm, again, I think as part of trying to keep my writing focused on what I want to do, I don't really chase my reviews. I don't sort of go online and read them that much. But people
Mhm.
who have got in touch with me have all said really lovely things, and I have read some lovely reviews. So I think um, I think it's been good within the autistic community. I've had some really lovely autistic advocates review the book. Um, and they've sort of said that they've really enjoyed it. And again, from the Jewish people I know, it's been positive too. So I'm hoping that that's the case.
Yeah, yeah, that's very good to hear. We love positive feedback. Um, and for those autistic people, or more specifically women in this case,
Mm,
who are thinking, to share their stories and start writing,
mm.
would you have any advice to give to them?
I would say um, perhaps not all autistic people feel this. I'm willing to bet a lot of them do. That my experience growing up and being autistic, and not just growing up, actually being an adult as well, you are a bit of an outsider. You are that person looking in. You are observing people, and a lot of the time you're observing people because you're fascinated because they're so different, but also for survival, you need to learn how to mimic those people. You need to learn what's socially acceptable because the way you do things is different. And that might not be the most healthy of things psychologically, but I think it's a huge advantage as a writer, that you are sort of on the outside and you are always looking at people and seeing what they're doing. So I would say use that. And I would say the same for any other part of your autism, any other trait, work out what your strengths are as an autistic person and then use that in your writing. I mean, obviously, it requires slightly different skills writing a memoir, say, as opposed to writing a fictional novel. Um, but I think another thing I would say is, being autistic, there can sometimes be these sort of blind spots in our perception, so sometimes we're doing something and we think it'll be perceived a certain way and it's not, or vice versa with people doing things and we're perceiving it. I would say writing is a great tool of self-expression. And if you want to put your experiences on a page, do. But then once you've done that, remember that other people are going to be reading them. And so that self-expression is your starting point. Then make it into a work of art. I'm not saying censor yourself in any way, but I'm saying that um, make people want to turn the page, create something
Yeah.
beautiful, create a work, not just a sort of a massive sort of diary entry of your experience. Create, something that's really amazing as a kind of craft, as a writer, that's based on your experiences and then kind of is lifted a little bit as well.
Yeah, that keeps people engaged and
Mm.
wanting more and more to
Yeah,
come. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
So, what is next for you? Do you already have any plans for a new book or a new project?
So Evie was actually written a while ago, and so there is. I've been writing this Jewish kind of family saga about four sisters, and it's told from the perspective of the youngest girl. It's set around the time of the millennium, and they're a very sort of disparate family who sort of don't necessarily get on that well. And it's told from the point of view of the youngest sister who has been diagnosed with autism, and it's about that family sort of finding their way back to each other. So yes, and I'm working on another one after that as well, because when I signed to my publisher, I knew because of their schedules that it'd be 18 months before Evie was published. So it's actually been quite a long gap since I wrote Evie. So yeah, I've been working on some other things.
Yeah, good. We are looking forward to have them ready whenever
Thank you.
they are.
Thank you.
Great. So now focusing more on your journey,
Mm,
and this is the last section of the interview. Who
mm.
is your biggest support?
Oh, I mean, I should probably say my parents at this point, but I think it's actually my French bulldog, Loretta. I know it's an awful thing to say, but just I mean, I love that really strong bond we have as autistic people with animals, and Loretta is my constant companion and she gives me so much unconditional love. It's just been amazing to have her. She's a rescue. And she is quite anxious. She doesn't really get on well with other dogs, and she's very set in her routine. I mean, I swear she's an autistic dog, but
I
but
was
she's
thinking about that.
yeah, yeah. Um, but she's my companion, and I honestly don't think I could probably cope with having a human as a constant companion. So I mean, it's really really lovely to have Loretta.
Yeah, good. I think it's the first guest who names a dog as
Yeah.
the biggest support. So that's very cute.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, really. But anyway.
No, I think it is. I think we all know that animals are, they can be more loyal than people,
Yeah. Yeah.
and sometimes better
Yeah.
companions. So
Yeah.
absolutely valid and admirable,
Yeah.
definitely. And who is your biggest inspiration?
Oh, well, do you know, when I was young, I think again when you're when you're autistic, you get these really kind of fierce obsessions with people sometimes. And I was absolutely obsessed with Elizabeth I when I was young. So I wanted to be a kind of cross
Okay.
between Elizabeth I and Bette Midler. And I'm not sure how that's working out for me, to be perfectly honest. But I think when I was dancing, my role model was Maya Plisetskaya. She was a prima ballerina of the Bolshoi during the Soviet years, and she was a Jewish woman and came up against a lot of anti-Semitism and a lot of prejudice during her career, and she just coped with that by dancing better than everybody else, which I think is a great message. And she was just an amazing woman, so beautiful and such a beautiful dancer. And I think I'm lucky, within my own family. So my grandmother was a novelist. Um, she was an incredibly intelligent woman who did not suffer fools gladly. And unfortunately, she died when I was 11, so she's never seen me get my novels into print. But yeah, she was always somebody to look up to. And actually, my great great aunt Nina, she was a poet and a translator. And this is at the turn of the last century, so
Yeah.
quite a while ago. And she was a key figure in the Jewish women's suffrage movement. So she was a suffragette. She had 6 children. She brought up her daughters, she educated them to the same level as her sons. She expected them to have careers, which they did, So she was a truly amazing woman. And I still read some of her poems sometimes. She's a real inspiration, big shoes to fill. But yeah, I really look up to both her and my grandmother.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of talent in the family, and that's quite fascinating to see.
Thank you.
Um, and I don't know if you are much into superheroes, but if you were a superhero or had a superpower, who or what would that be?
Yeah, I'm not really that into superheroes, to be honest. I thought the sort of power that I would most like, and maybe I should be telling this to a therapist, is probably invisibility. I'd love to be able to be invisible, just I think sometimes, just to be able to kind of slip between situations. And I think, again, it comes back to perhaps being a writer and liking to watch people and finding people really fascinating.
Mhm.
It'd be nice to do that sometimes without people knowing that they're
Being
being
noticed.
watched, which sounds really creepy. And I don't mean it to sound like that. Um, but yeah, that would probably, I guess, be my superpower.
Yeah, I don't think it sounds creepy, from the observation point of view, it
Yeah,
makes total
yeah,
sense, and then you could,
yeah,
write about it without being
yeah,
noticed. Because the
exactly.
truth is that if you stage things too much
Mm,
when you are observing, then the natural
yeah,
response is not going to be the same. So
exactly.
not
Yeah.
creepy at all.
Okay, okay, thank you.
And if if there was a song that captures your journey, in this case
Mm,
as yourself, as a writer, as being
mm,
neurodivergent,
mm.
which one would that be, and how does that resonate with you?
So, so I'm a very sort of impatient person, and like we touched on before, I'm quite black and white about things. And
Mhm.
I'll set a goal, and I'll want it to happen immediately, and I'll want it to happen exactly as I envisaged. So I'm not the best process kind of person, and I'm not the best at dealing with setbacks or when things happen slightly differently or when I have to wait. And I always joke that I then kind of need to lock myself in a dark room and listen to Miley Cyrus's The Climb on repeat for 20 minutes, just
Okay.
because uh, I think that song, honestly, for me, it genuinely has quite an important message, in the sense that you sometimes just have to appreciate the fact that you're working towards something rather than the fact that you have achieved something or have not achieved something. And I think it's sort of reminding me that there is that kind of grey area in that process, and that's fine. And I think as an autistic person, sometimes you go over the past a lot and things that have happened, and you worry a lot about the future, but being in the present isn't necessarily the easiest thing. So I think that's quite a good reminder that sometimes you just have to enjoy it as it's happening and not look towards the end too much, you know. I will say as well, there's a song called I Told You So by Carrie Underwood that I was listening to on repeat leading up to my autism assessment because I was sort of it was my song of the moment. And
Mhm.
whenever I hear it now, I have this kind of Pavlovian response and I get really nervous about my upcoming autism assessment, even though it was years ago. But that's the song that reminds me of being assessed. So that's a bit of a strange one, but
Yeah, I think music can be so powerful,
mm,
to the point of reminding you
yeah,
of having that same emotion of something
yeah,
that you had
yeah,
years ago.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
well, great. Thank you for sharing. And I think this is a good one for you, especially because you were late diagnosed.
Mm.
If you had the chance to go back in time,
Mm.
what would you tell your younger self?
Do you know, I've thought about this a lot because also you see it quite a lot in the autistic community and on social media and things, people writing letters to their younger selves. Um,
Hmm.
I think for me, honestly, having thought about it, I would tell my younger self that you are autistic and that's okay,
Okay.
you know, and that's what I would say.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that makes absolute sense.
Mm.
And what are your hopes for the future, Harriet?
Um, in terms of myself, I hope to keep writing and keep getting published, and I hope to stay healthy. There's a lot about kind of skills regression in autism, and I know if I'm really stressed or burnt out, I lose my capacity for memory or some of my sort of skill sets and things. So I'm quite, I'm trying to kind of live in a way that minimizes that as much as possible. And I think in broader terms, in terms of the autistic community, I hope understanding of and acceptance of autism keeps moving forwards. I hope that people who sort of spread misinformation around autism for whatever agenda, I hope they don't manage to push us back. Um, and so yes, I just hope that we can move forward and develop. And as you said, I think, it's about representation in from all aspects of the spectrum as well. I think we're still, as autistic people, in the very early days of really finding our feet and communicating and saying, well, no, our experience is important, and here's what we want you to know, and here's how you want to, here's how we want you to address us, and here's the language we don't want you to use around us, but I hope that given time, that representation will be really broad and our voices will be more a part of popular culture and everyday life. So those are my hopes, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and and to be part of policy making and
Yeah,
everything, like
yeah,
the healthcare system, the education system. We definitely need more autistic voices and neurodivergent voices
yeah,
to be part of all of these.
yeah. No, I
Yeah,
completely agree. It's the nothing about us without us, isn't it? I think. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. But I
yeah.
think I really believe that together, just by having this conversation, and every conversation
Mm,
I have with my
mm,
podcast guests and people who I connect with and
mm,
are curious about it, because
mm.
I think we all agree that curiosity is a very simple thing, that
Yeah,
if people would be more curious,
yeah.
then I think the world would already be a better place for the neurodivergent community.
Yeah, I agree. I think it drives us forward. And I think that's actually what's great about being autistic. We have that constant kind of thirst for knowledge and to find out about things and do these really
Yeah.
sort of deep dives into things. But yeah, I agree. And I think you provide a great platform there by letting people share their experiences. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's really fantastic to see how each of my guests, and and myself as well with the
Mm,
podcast, but how creative and how many amazing initiatives everyone brings, and
Mm,
how, yes, again, every single one of us is
mm,
doing a small part
yeah.
to make things better, and that really warms my heart and makes me to keep going even on
Mm,
days when I feel like,
mm,
I have the imposter syndrome and I'm like, what am I doing here?
yeah,
Which
yeah, no.
happens quite often.
Yeah, no, me too. I do get imposter syndrome too. And I think, like you said, I just think you have to remind yourself that, your voice matters, and moving forward,
Yeah,
and, all our voices have to come together, and then that'll hopefully create something really positive.
yeah, definitely.
Mm.
Okay, and finally, if your heart had a voice, what would it tell us?
Oh, well, I think similar to what we've just been talking about, I think what it would say is that your people matter. And I think that that's
Mhm.
obviously going to be very different to each person. For some people, that might be family. For other people, it might be friends. I think if you're autistic, it's maybe that wider community of autistic people too. As a Jewish person, it's Jewish people for me as well. And I think it's um, just about finding those deeper connections with people who've shared experiences with you and have those similarities, and those sort of special stories. And I think, you know once you find those people who are your people, we should look after each other. So that's what my heart would say.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Harriet, it has been a great pleasure to get to know you, to learn all about your lived experience, and yeah, I hope we can stay connected in the future, and maybe you come back to talk about your next book at some point whenever it's out.
Yeah, no, I would love that, and thank you very, very much for having me. It's been really lovely to talk to you.
You're most welcome. To everyone, follow Harriet, and yeah, go and read her book and her blog, and I'm sure you will. It will be very helpful for everyone. And I'll see you all soon. Bye. Thank you for listening or watching the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you, please know that you are not alone. Your experience matters, your voice matters, and your way of being in the world is valid. I'm Andreia Costa, and this podcast exists to celebrate neurodivergent lives in all their complexity, strength, and individuality. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it, and help these stories reach the people who may need them the most. Join me again next time for more honest conversations, powerful stories, and diverse perspectives, because every neurodivergent journey is different. And remember, when you meet one neurodivergent person, you've only met one neurodivergent person. Until next time, take care. Bye.